If you're unfamiliar, let me introduce you to the last gets disqualified championship. Essentially, if you finish last, DNF or not, you get eliminated from F1, so it's all about being the last man standing. Let's see who would be retiring on lap 1. We didn't even get to lap 1. Yep, that's right, Hajar crashed out of his F1 debut, one corner into the formation lap. And so, he comes into the sport, and he very swiftly leaves, becoming our first disqualified driver. Nothing changes out in front obviously with this, and Norris defends from Verstappen to take victory in the opening round as his teammate fell down the order late on. McLaren and Mercedes are tied, but the Papaya team stay in first thanks to having a higher position, that being first. So let's move to round 2 at China. There will be no sprints, I repeat, no sprints in this championship. I can already hear you celebrating at your desk, because frankly, there are too many, and also it would complicate this way too much. Sprints don't mean anything. So we moved straight into the race, and everyone was well behaved in this one. But we would find out who was getting disqualified on lap 4, because Fernando Alonso would suffer with brake issues, ending a very short season for him. But wait, what's that I'm hearing? We're getting info that 3 drivers have been disqualified. Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, and Pierre Gasly are the names in question. So who's going to be getting disqualified now? Well, because Gasly was P11 on the road and the Ferraris were further ahead of him, he is sadly going to be our second retirement. I swear to God, if Ocon gets disqualified next race and it's 3 French drivers out in 3 races, that country might explode. And to the Gasly sympathizer in my comments, you know who you are. You are excused from the classroom and are allowed to click off the video if you choose. I won't hold you to it. But as for the last Frenchie still in F1, Ocon grabbed a P5 thanks to the Ferrari collapse. But it would be Piastri taking the win in China. His teammate was right behind him in second, and so nothing changes in the standings. Oscar is still 16 points behind and is going to need to keep winning to cut that gap down, and McLaren are still in front in the constructors. This is going to be a rough year for the teams. Round 3 at Japan brought us back to the usual weekend format, and in this one, we didn't actually get a retirement. Instead, the high-flying Stroll gets disqualified for simply being the shittest of them all. Seriously, he qualified 20th and finished 20th. This is the Stroll inconsistency that is robbing us of at least a semi-decent driver. But with that, he's out of the running, and Aston go from 10 points to 1 because Alonso was got on the board after just about surviving in China. Verstappen won in this one ahead of the 2 McLarens who were both squabbling for second place, and so Max is now 6 points behind Norris, who continues to lead, and McLaren are 35 points ahead of second in the constructors. I should probably also mention that Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson seat swapped, and thank God they didn't get disqualified while at their first teams. That would have been a fucking nightmare to sort out. Travelling to the Middle East for round 4, Bahrain would see Carlos Sainz last on the road thanks to a clash with Yuki Tsunoda. But luckily for him, and maybe it's a Spanish thing, Nico Hülkenberg would be disqualified for excessive plank wear after he finished 13th. And so this means Carlos lives to fight another day, and Sauber have now lost all 6 of their hard-earned points. Up front, Piastri would win from Russell and then Norris as Verstappen was struggling down in 6th. And with that result, Piastri jumps the Red Bull driver and is 9 points behind his teammate going into Saudi Arabia. And McLaren are still dominating. Saudi Arabia had a fast start with Verstappen trying the outside line into turn 1 and the already disqualified Gasly taking his anger out on Tsunoda. And thanks to our rules, Yuki is now out, having only scored 4 points for Red Bull in his 3 races with the team. It's unfair, but it's racing. But back to the front, Piastri would win as Verstappen earned a 5-second penalty for the turn 1 incident, and Norris recovered to 4th after crashing in Q3. But despite his effort, the pastry win was too much, and he now leads the standings by 4 points, with Verstappen only 11 points behind. And if you're wondering why I'm using a table to show the results when at the end of all this there will only be 1 driver left, it's because it's the easiest way to show you who's still left in the championship. When we get into the latter rounds, this whole table will be changing, so stay tuned for that. And finally, in the constructors, nothing has changed. McLaren are 75 points ahead and look to be uncatchable, unless a McLaren is disqualified, of course. And going into Miami, we got another lap 1 retirement. This time, it would be Jack doing as he tangled with Lawson on the first corner and suffered an unlucky puncture which retired him. And with this result, Alpine become our first disqualified team, but more on that later. Piastri would win in this one from his teammate in second and Russell in third, and now leads the championship by 11 points. He's now over 20 points ahead of Verstappen, but I think Max is just waiting for the McLarens to trip over each other because that's the freest way to claim first in this championship. And in the constructors, McLaren are almost 100 points ahead of Mercedes. If there's ever a time to use the wilted rose emoji, it's right now. This sport is so finished. Oh yeah, and as you can see, Alpine are disqualified as an organisation. Get used to this purple because it's going to consume all of the tables very soon. Imola saw Max trying to do what he did in Saudi Arabia, and it actually came off, as he went around the outside of Piastri to take the lead. And behind, everyone kept it clean. It would take another 27 laps to find out who would be getting disqualified, and in Imola, it would be Esteban Ocon, ruling out the last of the Frenchies in F1. France as a country has now effectively been disqualified from the sport, even though they literally govern it. But as for the final result, Verstappen won from the two McLarens and retakes second in the championship from Norris, now 14 points behind Piastri, who continues to lead. Ocon's DSQ does a lot for Haas, who go from having 25 points to now only 8, as Behrman is their last driver remaining. Let's see how far he can go. But McLaren are 112 points ahead of Mercedes, so let's just move on to Monaco. There were no 2024 shenanigans in this one, but Gasly was still pissed about being eliminated so early and decided to rear-end Tsunoda in response. Damn, he really hates Yuki. But halfway through this one, we would find out who would be getting disqualified. It would be Fernando Alonso, who escaped in China but could not escape in Monaco as his Aston Martin failed him once again. And so, up front, pole sitter Norris won from Leclerc and Piastri and retakes his second place in the championship. Piastri continues to lead, but the gap is now 9 points to his teammate and they are cleaning up in the constructors. However, behind, Aston Martin become our second team to be disqualified, this time after they had scored 14 points across Stroll and Alonso. Rest in peace, Lawrence Stroll's project. In Spain, everyone kept it mostly clean at turn 1, and then Albon had contact with Lawson on, I think, lap 1, and then later on in the race, that forced him to retire. He wasn't our first retirement as Stroll had withdrawn from the race, but as he was already eliminated from contention, Albon was the next one to go, eliminating Williams' main breadwinner. But in this one, Piastri controlled proceedings out in front, Norris came through to finish second, and Russell successfully rage baited Verstappen into finishing 6th instead of 3rd. And special shout out to Bortoleto and Colapinto, who scored their first points in this one. Looking to the standings, Piastri is now 15 points ahead of his teammate and now 34 ahead of Verstappen, with Russell becoming the 4th driver to break 100 points. But in the constructors, something weird has happened. No, it's not McLaren being docked 200 points, so this fight is actually interesting. Instead, Alpine have been reinstated because Colapinto scored a point for them. This went down like a house on fire in the last video, so I'm keeping this system in. If a team dropped a driver mid-season and bought in a new one, they are allowed back into the championship so long as they score a point. So welcome back Alpine, let's see how long they last this time around. Now with a point to prove. Get it? After Rage Bait Gate in Spain, Russell and Verstappen lined up right next to each other in Canada. But unfortunately, no fun was to be had as Russell got away well and Verstappen bottled it. Our first retirement wouldn't come until lap 46 when Albon suffered engine problems and retired at the end of the big hairpin. But the next retirement would have a match. Liam Lawson had endured a tough weekend having started from the pit lane and was told to retire to save his power unit. Clearly VCARB didn't know the consequences of their actions because now Liam has been disqualified and the team has also been booted out of F1. And this means that Lando Norris gets away with murder by 13 laps. Russell would win this one from Verstappen and Antonelli, and Piastri scored 12 points, meaning that he was now 27 points ahead of his teammate, who is 1 in front of Verstappen. And in the constructors, McLaren are too far ahead and VCARB become our second disqualified team. Only 11 drivers remain going into round 11 at Austria, and being disqualified from this one was going to be Sainz, as he couldn't get going on the formation lap and then set himself on fire at the end of the pit lane. He just loves burning in Austria. The track that used to be dominated by Red Bull was now McLaren's personal playground, and the top two very quickly gapped the rest of the field. They tried to kill each other a few times but kept out of any incidents and came home 1-2 with Norris in first. Piastri is now 20 points ahead of Norris and Verstappen wouldn't score any as he would be punted on lap 1 by Antonelli. And in the standings we now have our final 10. Let's have a look at these names. Well, obviously we've got both McLarens, both Mercedes, both Ferraris and Verstappen, who is pretty much just Red Bull at this point. Behrman is still doing well for Haas, Bortoleto is scoring nice points for Sauber after Hülkenberg's disqualification, and Colapinto is actually scoring points. Oh yeah, and here's the constructors. McLaren are dominating and we only have 7 teams left thanks to Williams losing Sainz this weekend. So let's see what happened in Britain. After scoring 7 points in his brief time in the sport, it was time for Colapinto to say goodbye because he completely destroyed his clutch coming out the pits and he was forced to retire then and there. He didn't even start the race. This was a very different race than what actually happened in real life. For one thing, Hamilton actually got on the podium, but it was still Norris and Piastri in first and second, and unfortunately no Hülkenberg podium. But having got another win, Norris is now only 13 points behind his teammate. It might end with the two cars being on track together as the only cars on track at this rate. And as for the constructors, we're down to 6 teams as Alpine are gone for the second time. At least Franco got 7 points though, that's pretty decent. Belgium was next up and we are down to 9 cars. In the end, a retirement wouldn't decide the fate of our disqualified driver, instead it was his pace. Antonelli would start in the pit lane and finish 16th, 13 seconds behind his closest competitor, and so is disqualified for simply being too slow. As for the fight at the front, Piastri and Norris were 1-2 again, and the order is pretty ordinary. Pastry is back up to 20 points ahead of his teammate, and we now have 8 drivers left. McLaren are still leagues ahead in first, with Ferrari up to second now that Mercedes only have 1 driver. In Hungary, Verstappen and Hamilton were incredibly off the pace. But luckily for them, the retiree in this race would be someone still in the championship. Ollie Behrman would retire on lap 48 with an issue, and so those 2 guys get saved. And judging by this move from Max, he was not willing to get disqualified that easily. At the front, Norris would get back on the top step and is once again 13 points behind his teammate. Verstappen's average weekend means he's now nearly 80 points behind the leaders, and even Russell is almost level with him, as he and Leclerc had a big scrap to see who would take the final podium place. McLaren are into the 500s as a team, and Haas have been eliminated, leaving us with 5 teams as we head to Zandvoort and Max Verstappen land. Verstappen almost dropped it on lap 1, and that would have been embarrassing in front of his home fans, but Hamilton saved any blushes he might have had because he binned it at turn 3 and retired first instead. This means Ferrari have now finally lost one of their drivers. But 30 laps later, Antonelli was still sad that he'd been disqualified and decided to terrorize his home country's team as a result, clipping Leclerc and retiring from the race. Ferrari got away with it in China, but here they weren't so lucky. They had just lost one of their drivers and they were going to be scoring no points. And so, because of this, Lando Norris would once again escape death by about 12 laps, as his engine went boom with 8 laps to go. Norris has had 2 DNFs, one was his fault and one was his engine, and yet he's still in this championship. In fact, because he was classified, he's still got 10 points, which is hilarious because he finished 18th in real life. Hamilton clearly knew what was at stake here and what was going to happen to Norris, and so saved his fellow countryman instead. Piastri is now 28 points ahead and we're down to 6 drivers. Bortoletto has done really well to stay in this championship, I have to say. And in the constructors, only McLaren have both of their drivers still, and Verstappen is the best of the one-man teams. We're coming to the point of the season where it's going to be rare to see a DNF decide who goes, and in this one, despite having a really good race and finishing in P8 in real life, Bortoletto would be the worst of our 6 drivers and was disqualified as a result. And with Verstappen winning and the McLarens in 2 and 3, Oscar is now ahead by 25 points with Verstappen 72 back. But Max did win here, so maybe he's coming good at the perfect time. But moving across to the constructors, we're now down to 4 teams with Sauber now disqualified. Piastri must have taken what I said barely a minute ago to heart, because he picked this weekend to be one of his worst. He crashed in Q3, he jumped the start, fell down to P20 on lap 1 and then crashed at turn 6, eliminating him from the championship and handing Verstappen an easy win and his teammate the championship lead. So that was a pretty easy one, and now Norris retakes the lead in the championship, but he's only 37 points ahead of Max now. Leclerc also got away with murder this weekend because he was P9. Ferrari had another terrible weekend and yet are still in with a shot. Oh yeah, and finally the constructors is looking good again because McLaren have lost one of their drivers. In Singapore, we only had 4 drivers left in the title fight, and once again it was determined by pace. And in their terrible form recently, Leclerc would be getting disqualified after he finished in 6th place, 38 seconds behind his closest competitor in Norris. Russell took the win in this one, and clearly he didn't fancy getting disqualified either, and we're now left with our top 3 in the drivers and constructors standings: Norris, Verstappen, Russell, and McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes. The Americas would host the final 2 rounds of this incredible championship, and thank God for the McLaren's sake that we don't do sprints because they would have been fucked. But as it happened, Russell would finish 6th this time around, 26 seconds behind Norris as Verstappen won. He was now just 27 points behind Norris, but as we know, this championship only has 1 round left. Mexico. Mexico is a track that has been dominated by Red Bull since its reintroduction in 2015, but in 2025, Norris had other plans. He would set a lap 3 tenths quicker than anyone else in the deciding lap in Q3, and he was 5 tenths ahead of Verstappen. Off the line, he made a good start for once, and even though the run down to turn 1 is long, he held on to his lead. Maybe he'd been paying the Ferraris behind because neither of them fancied overtaking him and instead decided to get in Verstappen's way instead. Max would go off track, narrowly missing the barrier at turn 1 and keeping the car pointing in a straight line, somehow. But it was clear that the McLaren was built with this track in mind because Norris checked out. Verstappen had no answer, and at the checkered flag, he was 31 seconds behind. Norris kept the lead on lap 1 and never lost it, becoming the 2025 last gets disqualified champion. What an honor. But if you're wondering what happened in the crazy 2010 season with this system, that video is on screen for you to watch right now.